Welcome back. Great to be together. Phyllis Schlafly, Eagles Collegians Summit. We were just talking off the air. Mike Davis is our next guest. He himself has been a practicing lawyer in the private sector. He has worked in all three branches of the government. He clerked for the U.S. Supreme Court. He worked at the highest level for the Senate Judiciary Committee and worked in the White House and has been involved now the last 15 or so years in almost all of the, I'd even just say Republican, but certainly conservative efforts on judges, on policy stuff. We got a lot to talk about with Mike. And also, we were talking off the air, he knows how Washington is. He was asking if many of the interns are interning on the Hill. There's a bunch of those, but our collegians are all over the country too. Mike Davis, I mentioned all of his background. Also, he's the founder and the head of the Article 3 Project, article3project.com. I think I got it right, Mike. So welcome back, Mike. How are you?
Doing well, and thank you, Ed, and welcome to all the college students.
Yeah, thanks. Well, this must be like, it must be a dream come true for you because, I only half kidding, because there's litigation. Donald Trump keeps getting indicted. People want to fight about it, and Mike Davis hasn't ever passed a good brawl and not joined in some form. So when you're watching this, Mike, again, you're a very highly trained, accomplished lawyer. I'm not kidding. At the highest level, clerk for the U.S. Supreme Court. But watching this, I remember you telling me on the radio how appalling it was to have a leak from the Supreme Court last spring, and now we have basically the legal system and the prosecutors just kind of ganging up on Trump. Get Trump. I mean, it's not a good moment.
No, this is lawfare. This is lawfare by the Democrat Party to try to take out President Trump as a presidential candidate through the legal system because the Democrats fear they can't beat Trump in November. And they have a good reason to fear that because there's a new Rasmussen poll out showing that President Trump is handily beating President Biden by like 6 points. And so we see the lawfare in several different places. New York's Alvin Bragg, the Soros-funded Manhattan DA, started the lawfare. They indicted Trump, the first time a former president has been indicted. Alvin Bragg indicted Trump for the non-crime of a businessman trying to settle a nuisance claim. And Alvin Bragg tried to bootstrap this and turn it into a federal felony for campaign finance violations, which is just absurd. The prior Manhattan DA, the Federal Election Commission, the prior Manhattan U.S. Attorney, and Alvin Bragg himself declined to prosecute this bogus legal theory. And then Matthew Colangelo came from the number 3 office in the Justice Department, a political hitman, to Alvin Bragg's office, and they resurrected this zombie case and indicted Trump. So that's part one of their lawfare. Part two is Jack Smith. Jack Smith just indicted a former president for the non-crime of a former president having his presidential records in the office of former president, which is allowed under the Presidential Records Act. That's why Congress gives former presidents federally funded office space, the office of the former president, secure space, federally funded staff with security clearances and Secret Service protection. And then another part of this is they're going to try to indict Trump probably sometime in August down in Georgia, Fulton County, Georgia, with this other Democrat prosecutor, Fani Willis, who's going to indict Trump for the non-crime of objecting to a presidential election, which is allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887. It's also allowed by the First Amendment. You can twist arms politically. And if it's a crime to object to a presidential election, the Democrats would be in prison for 1969, 2001, 2005, and 2017. It's only a crime to object to presidential elections in third world Marxist hellholes. And Jack Smith is also looking at a piece of that. So that's what we are. Democrats can't beat Trump in November of 2024, so they're simply going to try to put him in prison for the rest of his life.
But Mike, if you're out there and you're a student, you're a college student, like you don't have as many years of watching this, and you're seeing this for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It's been going on. The press has been out of control in terms of being biased, and now it's not just like some goofy. I'm from St. Louis. Our St. Louis prosecutor in the city, she just quit. I mean, finally Gardner was going to be removed and she quit. She was clearly out of sync. And you're like, man, how could they elect that? But then you look around and you're like, people elect local officials that are sometimes really, out to lunch. This is the Department of Justice. Like, this is supposed to be where I guess it's like when we used to say, when growing up, the FBI, if somebody's dad was an FBI agent, you're like, oh, that's impressive. Now you're like, I don't know, that guy may or may not be a good guy. I mean, we've fallen a long way. And how does the system hold together if you can't have jury trials that aren't completely biased? If you can't, I mean, that trial up in New York, a civil trial against Trump, the civil jury came and said she did not prove that she was a victim of the action by Trump. That's what they voted together, the jury. Then they said, however, we're going to give her money for him saying he didn't do it. I mean, at a certain point, we've lost any semblance of a legal system.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. We've crossed the Rubicon with these indictments. They're so Trump deranged in the Democrat Party, and really a large element of the Republican Party in D.C. is so Trump deranged. They hate Trump because he's not a globalist. He doesn't believe in flooding our borders with illegal economic migrants. He does not believe in free trade agreements that hurt American jobs. He does not believe in sending other people's money and kids to go fight the globalist wars. And so the uniparty in D.C. hates Trump. And remember, with the Democrats, this is not our parents' or grandparents' Democrat Party. These are not liberals who love America and just disagree with conservatives on the best way to get there. These are leftist. These are Marxist. They hate America. They hate free speech. They believe in censorship. They hate equality. They believe in equity. They hate due process. They believe in Me Too justice, weaponized and politicized justice systems. And for them, the ends justify the means at all cost. And their ends is power. That's all they care about is power. And so that's what we're up against. We're not up against a fair fight here. These are people who are willing to corrupt our justice system to put their enemies in prison like they do in third world Marxist hellholes.
Mike Davis, our guest, he's the head of the founder and head of the Article 3 project, Article 3, the number 3project.com. I've been involved in all these different battles. We're asking our collegians in preparation for the summit questions. One of them actually came from one of our Eagles who teaches a lot of students. So I guess technically she's not a collegian, but I'm still going to ask you. What about the fact that there are prominent Republicans? Bill Barr spent the weekend on every show basically condemning Trump and, I mean, disagreeing point blank with you on the assessment of the Presidential Records Act and all this stuff. Again, it's almost disorienting to see, the lack of any kind of coherence. What gives with guys like Barr?
Bill Barr is better because Trump fired him, and Bill Barr does not want Trump to be the nominee or the president of the United States, and that's very clear. And so he like Joe Biden, like Merrick Garland, like Jack Smith, Garland's handpicked special prosecutor. Bill Barr is going to put his head in the sand and pretend like the Presidential Records Act does not exist. Under the Presidential Records Act, any record created or received by the president or his White House staff becomes a presidential record. And that includes classified records from the CIA or other intel agencies advising the president of the United States. And under the Presidential Records Act, those you can handle them in one of two ways. They're either, when he leaves office, they're either personal records that belong to him under the Clinton sock drawer case from 2012.
Wait, Mike, tell everybody. That gets thrown around so much. Again, college students, they weren't even born. Clinton was already out of office for years, many of them, math. Yeah, many, all of them. So what's that case, Clinton sock drawers? It's actually very interesting because it was Clinton, and I will let the record reflect, I suggested to Stephen Miller at the beginning of the Trump administration that they get a chronicler like what Clinton did. Clinton had somebody come into the White House or into the executive residence, and he spoke to him on audio tape for hours and hours and hours as an oral history. I forget his name right now, the author, who it was a best-selling book. But tell us what the Clinton socks or the sock drawer or what the heck it is. I thought the cat was named Socks, but go ahead. Tell us what that means for our students.
So before the Presidential Records Act was passed in the 1970s, presidential records were personal property of the president, and he can do with them whatever he wanted. And after Nixon got chased out of office, He was trying to sell his presidential records. He won a big court case on this where the court said, yes, these are the president's personal records. So Congress passed the Presidential Records Act. And the Presidential Records Act for presidents going forward said that presidential records, like we said, are records created or received by the president or his White House staff. And under the Presidential Records Act, they're government's property if they're presidential records. But under the statute, under the Presidential Records Act, the president can access his presidential records anytime he wants. But under this Clinton sock drawer case, President Clinton got caught with 8 years of highly classified audio recordings of his presidency, 79 audio tapes. And he took them from the White House when he left, and he stuffed them in his sock drawer. And this Obama.
I got a lot of stuff in my sock drawer. I mean, I'm sure you do, Mike. You got like I don't know, cufflinks in there, a couple of pocket knives. Probably a guy like you got like a couple of handguns. There's a lot in your sock drawer. Go ahead, keep going.
I have a lot of guns. I need them. But, so on this Clinton sock drawer case, remember this was the White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations who taped these tapes, who recorded this. She's the one who ran this system. So it was clear.
Right. It's a woman. There's a woman's name. She's still around now, right?
Yeah. So she ran this taping system. These are clearly presidential records under the Presidential Records Act. This Obama judge held back in 2012 when Tom Fitton at Judicial Watch sued to get these records. This Obama judge held that the mere fact that the president took these records when he left office and he didn't turn them in and affirmatively designate them as presidential records, that made them personal records under the Presidential Records Act that he owns. So he can have them, no one else can have them. That same case should apply to President Trump. When he left office and he took copies of his presidential records, not the originals, copies other than maybe his love letter with the North Korean dictator, these are his personal records under the Presidential Records Act, and no one has the right to have them. It doesn't matter whether they're classified or not. These are in the secure office of the former president. But even if they want to ignore this Clinton sock drawer case because it's Trump and everyone's Trump deranged, including Bill Barr, including Andy McCarthy, the uniparty Republicans in D.C. who have not probably stepped outside of D.C. or New York in the last 20 years, other than in their bubbles. So even if these are not personal records under the Clinton sock drawer case, these are presidential records that the former presidents have the absolute right under the Presidential Records Act. Both the former president and their representatives can access their presidential records anytime they want. And so for Biden to charge Trump with espionage and try to put him in prison to die over a fight with librarians and other bureaucrats over the Presidential Records Act is absurd. There's not even a criminal component to the Presidential Records Act. Yes, we do have two systems of justice as it relates to presidents and former presidents and their records and everyone else.
By the way, the author, and this Taylor Branch was a famous biographer of MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., and then he had this audio tapes he was recording with Clinton over and over. That's the case. Mike Davis, our guest. Mike, where does this go? Like, practically, you've got a president indicted, or a former president indicted, presidential candidate, the front runner indicted. Are we headed to a constitutional crisis where somebody's trying to hold a trial in September of the election year and keep the president off the trail? Realistically, I'm not as experienced in some of the details of these cases as you are, but realistically, you don't usually get a trial. If you want to delay a trial, especially with national security implications, you wouldn't get this tried within a year or a year and a half. So where are we headed with this stuff?
Well, I mean, it's the defendant who has the right to a speedy and public trial, not the government. Right. So that's number one. Right. Judge Cannon Trump got the luck of the draw with Judge Eileen Cannon, because she's a fair judge down in Florida, and she's not going to be cowed. She's a Cuban. Her family fled government dictators, and so she understands government overreach very well. So you're going to have a good judge. Hopefully, you'll have a fair jury pool that's a lot better than what you're going to get in Washington, D.C. or New York or one of these other Trump deranged venues. And so I think that Judge Cannon's going to ensure that Trump gets a fair trial. I bet you anything that the jury's not going to find him guilty. It's either going to be an exoneration or a hung jury. I doubt they're going to be able to get this trial done before the presidential election in November of 2024. You have to get security clearances for the lawyers on the case. You have to get jurors who are impartial. You have to go through the Classified Information Protection Act, the CIPA Act, when you're dealing with these sensitive documents. This is not going to get resolved before the 2024 election. And frankly, the American people simply need to resolve this in November of 2024, because if Trump wins, he can dismiss this case or pardon himself, and then we're done with this nonsense.
Mike, I was at an event last fall. A friend of mine hosted near my house for a guy running for Congress, and the guest speaker was Bob McDonnell. Bob McDonnell was the governor of Virginia, and he was targeted by an effort to use the law. There was a law that existed to use the law. I think it's called honest services. Maybe you can fill in the blanks here, where they basically said, you're the sitting governor. We know you got gifts from people. We know that was allowed, but we think that was untoward enough that it led to X and Y. We can't prove that you did, P because you got X, but we're going to throw it all at and they convicted him. And McDonnell, who had been a rising star, had a military career before he was governor, his career ended. And then 5 years later, on appeal, eventually the Supreme Court threw all of it out. And I think there was overlapping with some of the prosecutors that are in the matter now. But that's another part of this. A lot of this feels like it would be thrown out someday, even if there was a conviction, because it's clearly contrived to focus on a political player. Is that right? And am I getting some of the overlap correct?
Well, the biggest overlap, it was Jack Smith,
right,
who was the prosecutor in McDonnell's case. Jack Smith is the Democrat operative who is brought in to take out Republican presidential candidates. And like you said, Ed, Jack Smith did this with Governor Bob McDonnell in a bogus legal theory of fraud, just like Jack Smith's bogus legal theory under the Espionage Act against President Trump, where Jack Smith's going to ignore the Presidential Records Act, just ignore it, where the president has the right to either own or have his presidential records under the Presidential Records Act. So how the hell can that be espionage for unlawful retention of documents the president is allowed to own or have under the Presidential Records Act? Jack Smith got reversed 8-0 by the Supreme Court. It's really, really hard to do. That is, on a criminal conviction, to get reversed first of all, for the Supreme Court to even take it is hard, let alone to get reversed unanimously. It would have been 9-0, but Justice Scalia passed away before the ruling issued. But guess what? The damage was already done. Bob McDonnell's was ruined.
Right.
And that's their play again with Trump. They don't care if the Supreme Court actually upholds their conviction or reverses it. The damage will be done is their play. And they'll take out President Trump as a presidential contender in November of 2024.
Mike Davis, where can people go to find out more about your work? On Twitter, Mike Davis got a great Twitter feed, and you can follow him there. It's incredible for such a brilliant guy. His Twitter feed is ridiculous. It's at MRDDMIA. We'll put it up on our, make sure it's on the Chiron and other places. But where else do you encourage people to follow you, Mike?
That is an old Twitter handle that I can't change, and Ed gives me crap about that. It's at Article 3 Project, at Article number 3 Project on Getter Twitter Truth, along with my personal, what Ed just said, my initials in Des Moines, Iowa. And then it's at article3project.org, article3project.org. If you want to volunteer, hit us up, and we'll put you to work.
Okay, great. Hey, thanks, Mike Davis. He's in there, and he's got a number of threads on his Twitter feed that are kind of explainers on these key issues. Jack Smith's background, some of the law here, very worthwhile. So thanks, Mike. We appreciate it. Thanks for your efforts for everybody, but also for the Collegians on the summit here. So we're grateful. We will take a quick break. Phyllis Schlafly, Collegians 2023 continues in a moment.